Okay, so right now there's this mysterious object called 3I/Atlas, and it's from another star system just blasting through our cosmic backyard. So today we're going to break down everything we know about it, what we think we know, and some of the really, really strange theories that are popping up around it. And let's just let this sink in for a second. An object from another star system is here, right now. This is a huge deal. It's only the third time in history we've ever confirmed something like this. This thing is not from around here. It's been traveling for who knows how long, and now it's right on our doorstep.
So, the big question, the one everyone is asking, is what is it? Because this isn't just some random rock floating by. The closer we look at this thing, 3I/Atlas, the weirder it gets, and the more questions we have. Is it just, a natural thing? Or could it be something else? Something more?
Right off the bat, two big ideas kind of took center stage. On one hand, you have the mainstream scientific view. It's an interstellar comet. It's acting like one as it gets closer to the sun, so that makes sense. But then there's this other, more out there theory. The idea that maybe, just maybe, it's some kind of alien probe. A piece of tech sent here on purpose. All right, so let's start with what we can actually see, the evidence. As this thing has been getting closer and closer to the sun, it's started to change. And that's our first big clue about what we're dealing with. And the change has been pretty dramatic, actually. I mean, look at this. Back in early July, it was just this dim, kind of fuzzy blob in the sky. Fast forward to late August, and bam, it's grown this clear tail pointing away from the sun. That is the classic textbook look of a comet. Okay, so it's a comet, right? I mean, it looks like one, it's acting like one, seems pretty open and shut. Case closed? Yeah, not quite. See, when scientists started really digging into what this thing is made of, they found stuff that makes 3I/Atlas completely different from any comet we've ever encountered before. And this, my friends, is where the story takes a turn into the truly weird. We're going beyond just looking at it. We're now analyzing its very makeup. It's cosmic DNA. And the signals it's sending back, they are just super strange. Deeply anomalous. First up, let's just talk about the sheer size of this thing. The cloud of gas and dust around it, that's called the coma, is estimated to be 700,000 kilometers across. To put that in perspective for you, that is half the size of the sun. This thing is absolutely immense. So what's inside that giant cloud? Well, one of the biggest head-scratchers is what it's made of. Get this, for every 1 part water, there are 8 parts carbon dioxide. An 8-to-1 ratio. That is just bizarre for any comet we've seen in our solar system. But you know where you do find an atmosphere that's super rich in CO2 like that? Yep, Mars. So let's just recap how weird this is. The CO2 to water ratio is way off. Its color is this distinct reddish hue. Again, sound familiar? Like Mars. And when we look at the metals, it has way more nickel compared to iron than we'd expect. That's another huge red flag. It came from the direction of Sagittarius, sure, but its actual makeup, it's like nothing we know. So when you've got this many weird things lining up, the normal explanations just don't quite cut it anymore. And that's what pushes us into some pretty speculative territory. One source we looked at proposes this really radical idea, one that connects all these strange properties to, get this, consciousness itself. Okay, to get our heads around this, we need to understand a key concept. Something called a complex dusty plasma. That big cloud, the coma, isn't just a boring, chaotic bunch of gas. As the sun's radiation hits it, it gets ionized. It becomes a plasma. And the little dust particles inside get an electric charge. The whole cloud basically becomes this giant, electromagnetically active system that can actually start to organize itself. And this plasma can do some pretty incredible stuff. It can carry waves, kind of like sound waves, that are in the same frequency range as our own brain waves. It can organize itself into these ordered, almost crystalline or cellular structures. It even generates its own electric and magnetic fields. So in other words, it stops behaving like a random cloud of dust and starts acting more like a complex, living system. So here's the big leap that the source makes. It starts with a fact. The coma is an active, self-organizing plasma. Then, it connects that high level of complexity and resonance to some pretty out-there theories. Theories that suggest consciousness isn't just for brains, but it might be a basic property of any sufficiently complex system. Which leads to the wild question, Could this giant buzzing plasma cloud actually possess some kind of consciousness? And this quote really gets to the heart of that philosophy. The idea is, if consciousness is something fundamental to the universe, something that comes right out of the quantum field, then it's everywhere. It wouldn't just be limited to life as we know it, biology. It could show up in any super complex form, like, say, a massive electromagnetically buzzing plasma cloud. Okay, so let's pull back for a second, because we're left with this last set of observations, this string of really striking coincidences that make this whole thing feel, well, a little too perfect. Is this all just random cosmic luck, or is there something else going on here? I mean, just think about this. Its path is almost perfectly lined up with the ecliptic plane. That's basically the superhighway that all the planets in our solar system travel on. It came from the direction of Sagittarius, which, by the way, is the same spot in the sky where we got that famous wow signal back in '77. Its size is about the same as the moons of Mars, and wouldn't you know it, it's making a really close flyby of, you guessed it, Mars. So that's where we are. What is 3I/Atlas? Is it just a really, really weird interstellar comet with a bizarre chemical signature? Are all these Martian connections, its path, its origin, its color, just a mind-boggling cosmic coincidence? Or, as some people are starting to wonder, could it be something more? A messenger, maybe? Whether natural or not, something sent on a very specific path for a very specific reason. We just don't have the answers. But honestly, the mystery, that's what makes this whole thing so incredibly cool.
Welcome to the debate. Today we are wrestling with one of the most enigmatic and, frankly, pretty bizarre astronomical visitors in recent years, the interstellar object 3I Atlas. This object has really given astronomers fits because while it clearly showed, the classic sign of a comet, it grew a tail, its internal physics seemed to, reject that label almost entirely.
Absolutely. And the crux of the issue, the thing that keeps experts kind of scratching their heads, is how we classify this visitor. It forces us to confront the limits, really, of our solar system definitions when we try to apply them to material born somewhere else entirely.
Precisely. So the central question we're looking at today is this. To what extent do the observed anomalous physical signatures of 3I Atlas challenge the mainstream classification of the object as, let's say, a typical interstellar comet? My position is that, look, despite the compositional weirdness, 3I Atlas is fundamentally an interstellar comet. Its functional behavior aligns with objects approaching the sun. We just need to broaden our definition a bit.
I come at it from a different angle. I argue that the combination of its unique composition, its truly colossal scale, and especially the internal electromagnetic physics, that really places it entirely outside the reasonable bounds of a standard comet. Its properties suggest something fundamentally different, maybe highly complex or perhaps even a, self-organizing system.
Okay, let's start with the observable evidence that, anchors the comet classification. First off, orbital mechanics seem dominant here. 3A Atlas is following an expected perihelion path, hurtling along at around 68 kilometers per second. As far as we can tell, there is no empirical evidence yet of non-gravitational propulsion. It isn't slowing down or speeding up in a way that suggests, engineering. Furthermore, the optical evolution is pretty textbook cometary behavior. Early imagery showed a simple, round, diffuse object, right? But by late August, we had clear evidence of a tail extending anti-sunward. That tail formation, under solar pressure, is the defining visible function of a comet, regardless of what star system it popped out of. Now, yes, the composition is exotic. We see an estimated 8:1 CO2 to water ice ratio, enhanced nickel signatures, but we have to anticipate these differences in an object born outside our cosmic neighborhood.
Interstellar means atypical. It doesn't inherently mean non-cometary.
That's a fair point about its function, after it interacts with the sun, resembling a comet. But I just don't buy that the tail automatically defines its fundamental nature. If the tail is the only thing linking it to comets, that feels like a very superficial classification. Let me tell you why its internal nature really defies that label. We have to confront the sheer scale and the complexity of the gas envelope, the coma. Estimates place that coma at about 700,000 kilometers in diameter, I mean, just to give listeners some context, that is a cloud nearly the size of the sun itself, vastly, vastly larger than any typical comet we observe in our system. And moreover, this massive envelope of material isn't just a passive cloud of gas and dust. It is described as a complex, dusty plasma, and this is absolutely crucial. Within that state, the estimated electromagnetic force is 10 to the power of 36 times more powerful than gravity.
Okay, wait, let's just pause on that 10 to the 36 figure for a second, because that's a staggering number, I grant you. But isn't it still an effect of the solar interaction, rather than the definition of the object itself?
Well, I'd argue it absolutely is defining the object's reality once it's heated by the sun. I mean, when electromagnetic forces dominate gravity by a factor of 10 to the 36th, gravity becomes effectively irrelevant in terms of the internal dynamics and the structure of that coma. We are looking at a system where highly mobile electric currents and complex plasma physics are forming ordered, almost self-organizing structures, like crystalline lattices made of charged dust grains. And this system is generating its own internal electromagnetic fields. That seems fundamentally different from, a simple block of ice sublimating under gravity and solar heat.
Right. I see why you emphasize the scale and the electromagnetic dominance, and I agree those numbers are radical. But let's set the physics aside for just one moment and dive deeper into that first point of tension, the chemical anomalies. You point to the enhanced nickel, the high CO2 ratio, the reddish color, as evidence of something non-natural, perhaps specialized?
Yes, precisely, because you cannot isolate just the CO2 ratio. You have to consider the full chemical fingerprint together. The 8-to-1 CO2 to water ratio is, well, it's notably similar to the atmosphere of Mars. The reddish color is quite pronounced, and the nickel enrichment is a key chemical indicator. And this isn't just, elemental noise. The nickel signature is reportedly increasing at a rate that far outpaces typical solar system comets as it gets closer to the sun. This specific combination suggests a highly specialized, perhaps metallic-rich formation process. I mean, if this was just a random chunk of ice from another star's Oort cloud, why this specific fingerprint? It points toward maybe a dedicated and unique formation environment or mechanism.
Okay, I would frame the chemistry quite differently. I agree the CO2 ratio is unusual for our solar system, but it doesn't violate natural physics. If 3I-8 last originated from an extrasolar star system, perhaps an N-dwarf, or maybe a star with a very different metallicity than our sun, where the early conditions favored CO2 ice formation, then that ratio is completely explicable. The specific chemical fingerprint you cite, the CO2, the nickel, the reddish hue, that might simply represent the norm for a comet originating in a high metallicity, CO2-rich protostellar disk somewhere completely different. We could just be observing the limits of a natural chemical possibility we haven't encountered before. Claiming that the enrichment of nickel, for instance, implies a specialized or, technological origin feels like a leap when we have basically zero comparative context for extrasolar comet composition. It's an interstellar variant, not necessarily engineered.
But surely the sheer scale and the physical dynamics make that compositional argument stronger, not weaker. You want to normalize the chemistry as just a natural outlier. But when you combine that specific chemistry with the physics I described earlier, the picture changes entirely, doesn't it? If we accept that the chemistry is fundamentally alien, as you suggest, doesn't that make the physical dynamics we observe even more crucial for classification? How can you really call it a comet if gravity is essentially irrelevant in defining its internal structure?
Gravity defines its orbit, which is its core identity and its, long-term trajectory. Electromagnetism defines its shedding process, a highly energetic side effect of interacting with our sun. Are you suggesting its trajectory is non-gravitational? Because the evidence so far shows otherwise.
I'm arguing that its nature, its internal reality, is electromagnetic, which brings us right back to the dominance of plasma dynamics. Let's go deeper into what that 10-36 ratio really implies. A comet, as we defined it, is characterized by mass loss driven by sublimation and orbital mechanics, right? When the material sheds, the solar wind ionizes it into plasma, which is generally seen as a temporary, sort of transient effect. But here, The coma is so vast, and the material, these dust grains, are so charged that the plasma state dictates the behavior of the bulk material itself. We're talking about the formation of vast electric currents, what astronomers sometimes call Birkeland currents, that restructure the material completely. This means the object is electromagnetically active. It possesses highly ordered internal physics, forming distinct boundaries, hot and cold areas, and even taking on crystalline structures within that immense 700,000 kilometer volume.
Okay. I see why you find that complexity compelling, but I would frame it differently. That complexity is caused by the sun. It's not necessarily inherent to the object's pre-existing identity. Plasma formation and ionization are natural, you could even say inevitable consequences of any object getting close enough to our star. The object's material, which, yes, happens to be rich in nickel and CO2, reacts violently to the UV, the X-ray flux, the solar wind, causing extreme ionization, and yes, this generates complexity. It creates huge electric and magnetic fields. But these dynamics are extrinsic phenomena. They are imposed by the sun. The object itself remains defined by its mass, its original composition, and its trajectory. To say the plasma dynamics define the object seems like mistaking the effect for the cause.
That framing feels like it significantly minimizes the system's complexity, though. If the plasma is self-organizing, if it's forming its own internal fields and these crystalline structures, it stops being just a passive effect and becomes an active system in its own right. And this leads directly to the question of energy signatures and potential complex systems. And while this is where the data really forces us to entertain some highly unconventional ideas.
And this is where I would urge caution, keeping our focus squarely on the observable physics.
I think we must look at what the self-organizing plasma is actually doing. This complex dusty plasma generates internal fluctuations. They're called dust acoustic waves that have been measured in the 0 to 50 hertz range. Now, why is this frequency significant? Well, it's the same frequency band seen in highly complex organized systems right here on Earth. It matches the frequency range of human neural spiking, brainwaves, and the planet's own Schumann resonances, the sort of electromagnetic heartbeat of Earth's atmosphere. Now, if we invoke something like general resonance theory, which basically postulates that higher complexity and self-organizing correlate with greater interconnected energy or information processing, then the fact that 3I Atlas is generating organized internal energy in this specific frequency band suggests a system far beyond simple inert debris.
Okay, I have to push back there. I must reject the attempt to link measurable acoustic physics to general resonance theory, and by extension to concepts like consciousness or complex information processing. That feels like a massive speculative leap, one that's just not supported by any empirical evidence of its function. The measured acoustic waves are, most likely, simply the expected physical phenomena of this specific, highly charged plasma state. We measure the energy. We absolutely do not measure intent or consciousness.
But we do measure organization. We measure a system that seems to be resisting the simple forces of sublimation and gravity, and instead operating under ordered electrical forces. Furthermore, we also have to note the object's trajectory. It came in quite rapidly from the direction of the constellation Sagittarius, which is, toward the galactic center. And as we know, Sagittarius is the exact region of the sky associated with the famous 1977 WOW signal, a potential, if highly debated, indicator of extraterrestrial technology. Now, while that could absolutely be coincidental, the resonance between these energetic, highly complex, self-organizing characteristics and this specific, significant trajectory, well, it demands that we maintain an open mind and rigorously investigate the possibility of engineered purpose, or at least a level of natural complexity we haven't even defined yet.
Scientifically, though, we have to rely on the physics we can measure in its present state. We know 3 Atlas formed a tail. We know it is following a gravitational perihelion path. You mentioned the WOW signal and complexity, but there is currently zero evidence, none, of technological propulsion or control. No deviation from expected orbital dynamics. While the complex plasma state is absolutely fascinating, Until we see mass being jettisoned in a directional manner or a deliberate change in velocity, we have to prioritize the object's fundamental identity as one governed by mass and solar interaction. We shouldn't confuse plasma complexity with conscious purpose or an engineered system.
But you're defining the object by its simplest feature, the tail, while seemingly ignoring its most radical departure, its sheer scale and the absolute dominance of non-gravitational physics in its internal structure. If gravity is truly irrelevant inside that coma, the comet definition must ultimately fail.
I would argue that its mass and orbital mechanics define its existence, and the tail defines its function in the solar system as a material-shedding body. The complex plasma is just the very, very complex process of that shedding.
And I believe its electromagnetic reality defines its fundamental nature as a highly organized complex system.
So, as we conclude, 3I Atlas presents truly unprecedented anomalies, likely stemming from its unique interstellar origin. Yet its clear development of a cometary tail and its continued adherence, so far, to predictable orbital mechanics seem to confirm the mainstream classification as an interstellar comet. This visitation requires astronomers to significantly broaden their operational definition of comets, both compositionally and dynamically. But the label, I think, still holds.
I disagree that simply broadening the definition is sufficient here. The object's sheer scale, that 700,000-kilometer coma dominated by CO2, the confirmed factor of 10 to the 36th dollar, where electromagnetic forces just overwhelm gravity, and the unique, increasing compositional markers like nickel, all of this points toward a physical entity that operates fundamentally outside our traditional definitions. Its properties suggest a complex, self-organizing system that demands a much more rigorous and open-minded inquiry than simply labeling it a weird comet.
Well, regardless of our classification disagreement, 3 Atlas is a profoundly interesting object, and the extreme complexity revealed in the source material regarding its physical dynamics and cosmic implications means there is certainly much more to be explored about this truly alien visitor.
Absolutely. We definitely look forward to seeing what further analysis reveals as the data continues to pour in.